Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is episode number 43 of Yawn Office Hours. What am I about to watch? You might be asking yourself. Why is this silly man here with his goofy haircut and his strange glasses and his tweed vest? How have I wandered into this place? What is this nightmare? Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you what you're going to experience in the next hour. This is a call-in, because it's not live, because that would be a whole other nightmare. It's a call-in show, and you submit your questions to me on my website, www.adam-cole.com/office-hours, and I answer them. And the questions that you ask me generally, and I won't say 100% of the time, because y'all have submitted some weird questions that are not about role-playing games. I got some colorful shit in my inbox, I will tell you that. But I could suffer through it. And I find all the good ones. I find the good questions about game mastering, and I answer them. And that's how that works. So this is Office Hours. I'm me. You're you. Welcome. Put your butt in the chair if it's not already. Sit yourself down. Let's talk about role-playing games. Today's questions begin with, well, I'll let you decide. I'll let you decide if Stefan is being snooty about this question. I like this question, but I want to see what you think.
Hello, Adam. My name is Stefan /ColorMeSprinkles on Twitch. I haven't watched most of your Office Hours series. I probably only watched 5 or 6 episodes, but I'm wondering if it's really ideal for me to watch them. Is it really wrong to ignore advice given to me and just create my own ideas and methods for solving problems and grow independently as a GM? Or would it be better, do you think it would be better for me to get all the advice I possibly could and run my game with the guidance of a man who has experience with problems that, might be similar to my own? Yeah, I just want to know, which do you think is the better approach?
I love this question. This is like the boldest question, and it's so meta because I can't answer it. If I answer "don't listen to me," then I put you in a paradox loop where you've listened to me telling me you not to, and then so you didn't listen, but then you're doing what I said. And if you do that, then you shouldn't. Oh God, it's a good thing I'm not a robot. So I love this question. So the question, it's such a bold question because what Stefan is asking me is, should office hours exist? Right? The irony of asking me that by way of an office hours question is so good. Like, I love it, but what Stefan is actually asking here isn't so much about should office hours exist really, or should I listen to you? But generally, if we look at Stefan's question here, what they're asking is about learning for oneself versus adopting the practices of others. Right? Should we listen to folks who have experience, but also regarding that experience know that they're sometimes set in their ways, right? That they have a certain way of doing things, and that by following that advice, you're going to adopt patterns that they have. Now, obviously, my answer is yes, listen to me, because hi, hello, welcome to Office Hours. It's a show where I give advice about game mastering. And if people didn't listen, then there'd be no show. So obviously, I think that this is a thing to do. But let's talk about why I think that, and maybe why one might think otherwise, and some pros and cons. Let's engage. Let's not just answer the question and move on, right? So, game mastering so far. And I think it's undergoing some very dramatic and interesting changes, but game mastering so far has been kind of a linear tradition. And I've talked about it this way before. It's possible to pick up a Dungeons and Dragons book, right? Because there are going to be people who are watching this who are like, no, I didn't learn from anyone. There's no tradition here. I picked up the game and learned from the game. And that's possible. You can pick up the book and without any external advice or guidance or solid example of play, you can learn to run that role-playing game. Now, I don't think that a person writing a role-playing game is able to avoid imparting information about how the game is to be run outside of the rules. Look at every Dungeon Master's Guide ever written. It's like 2/3, well, maybe you could do this, right? The only way you could avoid being influenced by someone else's game mastering style would be if you were playing a game whose rules document was only rules. No commentary, no optional information. Do this or you're not playing the game. And I don't think that game exists, right? Even if you're playing first edition AD&D and you're trying to learn from the book and you've never watched anyone else play, Gary is so bad about being unbiased, right? It's not presenting just the rules, it's presenting applications of those rules by way of advice, which is why, ironically, given that I'm doing a GM advice show, I fucking hate GM advice in rulebooks. I hate it. I fucking hate it. I think it ruins rulebooks. So anyway, point being here, because of the nature of role-playing games as a social thing, you cannot play a role-playing game alone, and I don't think you can learn a role-playing game completely without playing it. More often than not, we're exposed to the discipline of game mastering as players in a more experienced player's campaign. Someone else is the GM. We are often introduced as players. I think this is a pretty standard experience for most people, anecdotally. And in the beginning, the only people who could dungeon master a role-playing game were Gary and Dave, right? Lords Gygax and Arneson, because they invented the game. And they DM'd the game out of their basement in the Midwest, and their groups learned to play D&D from them, and picked up some Gygaxisms and some Arneson techniques, and carried those on to their own groups that they spawned, right? So they created their groups, those groups created groups and groups and groups, et cetera, et cetera. And early on, Dave and Gary and the sort of first, the proto groups that were created at TSR, they produced books codifying the rules of the games that they were playing and engaged the larger D&D community, nascent though it was, through zines. They didn't have the internet. They had little printed fanzines that you could subscribe to, and you would get them in the mail that would offer rules clarification and advice on application of those rules. So in a way, even very early on, even over distance, pre-internet, Gary and Dave and their friends at the table were handing out advice, much in the same way that I am now to you, by way of these fanzines, granting context to the rules in the book, which is pretty much what I'm doing here. I'm giving you some social and mechanical and philosophical context for the games that you're already playing. Groups spread that GMing meme among themselves, splinter groups creating new GMs and new groups, and new games were created. People learned those or created them and taught them to people. And then by way of conventions, and then later the internet, Twitch and YouTube now, they all provide platforms for people who are interested in learning how to play and taking on the GM role to experience games either directly as players or indirectly as witnesses to the way other GMs run things. So this is a lot easier to do than it used to be, but it's certainly not new, right? What I'm doing is something that has been I'm following in the footsteps of people that go all the way back to that halcyon age in the early 70s of people just sitting down talking about game mastering and learning from their GM. And so there's a tradition of passage from one person to another, of influencer to influencee, in terms of how we learn role-playing games. And I think that it's just so ingrained in the way that role-playing games work that it's almost unavoidable all the way down to how these games are written. I don't think games are written with the idea that you can just pick up a book and learn them. And God knows, most of the games that I love, I didn't understand just reading them. I think the synthesis of play and discussion and the rules in the book are what teach you that game. I didn't really understand The Burning Wheel at all the first time that I read it. And then I played it, lights went on, right? So play as a part of game experience, I think affects this sort of advice thing, because you're picking up on what other people are doing, and so often you join a game as a player. Now, for me, witnessing the way other GMs run things is so important to my growth as a game master. Now, I could just not watch other people play. I could play in games and ignore the way that the GM runs the game. I could not discuss role-playing games. I could just construct an invincible thought bubble around myself. I couldn't. It's nearly impossible. We're going to pretend that I could, but no one's mental space is impermeable. Anyway, I could pretend that I am, and I could try to just run games the way I want to run them and not be influenced. But that's so boring, and you'll never grow as a GM, right? Because I think in big or small ways, experiencing gameplay changes the way that you think about the game, and the way you think about the game changes how you run it. My personal GMing style is not unique to me. The synthesis is unique. The thing that I do is unique, but the style is made up of the styles of every GM that I've ever played with or played under as a player, that every game that I've ever experienced and the way that that game tells you to GM has affected the way that I play. It's unavoidable, right? I could start a list. I could tell you all the game masters of late that have affected my play, but you know who they are already, right? You know that watching Trist run D&D changed the way that I thought about NPCs. You know that watching Matt Mercer build worlds changed how I thought about that. Scene description, Stephen Lumpkin taught me things about that. Watching literally every single person that I have ever watched GM has changed the way that I think about the game, for good or for ill. And I think that happens to you no matter what you do. And so if you're going to get influenced already, you might as well go out of your way to do it in a thoughtful, intentional way. Have a process, right? I think personally that kind of stuff is really important. Picking up on the way that other people do things, giving them space to affect you, gives you an opportunity to be better at the job, whether you're starting out or you've been GMing forever. Whether you're creating your style as an emulation of a specific GM because you don't know how to play and you're just like, what would Steven do? What would Adam do? What would whoever you think is your favorite GM, what would they do in this situation than doing it that way, right? That's going to teach you how to do things. Or whether you're just generally mashing a bunch of tips and tricks together from various places, GM technique is like any other inspiration. It's only going to help, and it's only going to get better the more you do it. And in this case, by better, I mean personal, unique. You're going to find your voice. Maybe you're going to learn directly from other GMs as you play in their games. Maybe you are a player and you're like, oh, that's interesting that they chose to do this way. Oh, that rules interpretation is interesting. I don't know if I would do it that way, but I'm picking up on that and I'm learning. Or maybe you're watching, Critical Role or role play and you're seeing neat things happen. And you're like, I wonder what my group would think if I tried that trick. Whatever it is, however you come at this, in my experience, exposure to other people's way of doing things is only going to help you. Because, I mean, what's the alternative? Right? What alternative do you have if you are avoiding advice? Actively avoiding being influenced by other people. Don't watch anyone GM. Don't ask questions. Certainly don't try to mimic anything cool you've ever seen. Try to be your own perfect, unique, brand new thing no one has ever done before by pretending like no one has ever done anything before. You're going to be left with your own guesses as a brand new GM and the rule book. And rule books are not great at creating game masters. I think game masters create game masters. I think play and experience create game masters. Rule books should teach you the rules, but they don't give you very good advice on how to apply those. Your intuition is super important, super relevant. You want to hold on to that. Your ideas also really important, but let's not fool ourselves and pretend like anything that you're creating, even if you try to avoid everyone else, is going to be unique anyway. I think that avoiding advice and avoiding the process of engaging other people who do the same job as you isn't going to help you be a better, more unique game master. You're going to learn how to play games by the rules, and you're going to be on your own if you do that. I just don't see the merit in trying to grow independently. Or maybe I don't believe in the value of avoiding advice. The thing, too, is that you're not such a malleable person, I assume, that you can't just pick and choose the advice you want to listen to. In the world of role-playing games, the job of the rulebook is to teach you the rules and not teach you general GMing principles. It's like any creative endeavor, right? You're going to learn to develop your own voice, not by avoiding listening to anyone else's, but with practice and time. Great architects apprentice themselves to more experienced architects to learn. Great musicians fucking listen to records. Great authors read books, right? There's nothing magical or special about learning how to do something utterly alone in a vacuum. There is no pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Fuck that shit. We belong to a community of game masters, a community of RPG fans, a community that has experience and understanding and a vast variety of different opinions. And yes, there's a lot of really shitty advice about game mastering, but it's all contextual. I've probably given some very shitty advice for certain groups right here on Office Hours. It depends on you and your needs and the groups that you are playing with. So I think you want to listen to your fellow GMs, right? Respect their experience, pay attention to the kind of games they play and the sorts of narratives that they prefer. There are a lot of different ways to GM correctly. Basically, what I'm suggesting is just listen, but be skeptical. Try things out. Accept failure. Approach your GMing with an eye towards how other folks do it. We can teach each other so many interesting tricks, but don't go looking for the one true way, right? I think that's what real individuality is. Individuality. I just made that word up. I'm a game master. I can do that. Real individuality comes from not refusing to expose yourself to styles that don't match your own, but about exposing yourself to as much as possible and then building a synthesis of those things. You are never going to reinvent GMing by learning in a bubble. What's smarter is to aim for the way to create your own voice while immersing yourself in the voices of others. Be willing to learn, endeavor to grow, and see the subtlety and nuance in other people's advice and experiences. Don't be dogmatic about things. Don't go looking for this one true way because it doesn't exist. You can't invent it. No one else has it. You will never find it. Don't do that. Advice from other GMs that you trust and whose style you know and respect will help you. And when you are an old pro at GMing and some new GM asks you why they should listen to you about your experience and advice, don't forget this moment, because you'll be me eventually, and you will have little babby nerds being like, I can figure this out myself. I don't need your ass, or whatever part of you use to game master.
Hey Adam, I've been trying to make a Space Trucker campaign at the request of my would-be players, but the problem that I'm running into is that every time I start thinking of mini-stories for it, it turns into your typical space quest. I was wondering if you had any advice about making non-combat based adventures.
Well, first off, shout-outs to Space Quest. A little Sierra adventure game from the 90s. That shit's great. Let's talk about your boring campaign. Woo! All right, your campaign is boring. Your campaign is boring, and that's a place to be. That's a thing to have happen to you. So boredom, like fun, is a byproduct of many things. The game you are playing, the people you are playing with, the space you are playing in, people's own personal shit that they bring to the table, the situation, the characters. There's a lot of stuff that makes up fun in a game. And in the same way, boring is the opposite. To paraphrase the philosopher The Plague from the classic movie Hackers, there is no good and evil, only fun and boring. And boredom is a thing that might happen to you and your game, but in the same way that you can't engineer fun, you can't avoid boredom for everyone without engaging them and talking about what that looks like. So what's boring to you or to one of your players or many of your players, such as space trucking, might be super fun and interesting to another. Let me tell you about the boringest game I can think of. It's a game where you play the crew of a spaceship, and Adam, you might say to yourself, if your name is Adam. Or to me, if you were talking to me. That doesn't sound boring. I love spaceships. Many of my favorite fictions begin and end on spaceships. You play the crew of a spaceship. And you owe money on that spaceship because God knows spaceships are expensive. And where did you get the money for a spaceship? Not in this economy. You owe money on the spaceship. You have a debt to someone. And so you take jobs, and in this game, mostly cargo jobs, moving material from one planet to another to pay off your spaceship debt. You visit systems that are randomly generated, not for story hooks, but to find out what kind of minerals they have. Traveler, at its core, might be the most boring concept for a game in the history of games. Literally, you are under debt and you have to get yourself out from under it, and nothing interesting has to happen in Traveler. In Traveler, you literally can just go from planet to planet, picking up materials and selling them on other worlds. Be like, Thraxium is at a premium on this planet, so I'm going to go to that planet and get some, and I'm going to bring it back. And you just fucking truck it around space, and nothing, you don't ever have to get attacked by pirates. You just worry about interest rates. It's so fucking boring. However, it's actually a super cool game and very well designed. And I've had lots of fun playing it in the past because as players, you can bring some interesting stuff to it. You can make it fun. But at the outset, if worrying about debt sounds boring to you, and if trucking shit around space sounds boring, you're probably not going to have a fun time. For everyone who is super into playing Lord Mascara Darkraven of Clan Blood Chaos as they flounce about darkly in the boudoir of the night, there are 10 people who wouldn't touch Vampire with a 10-foot pole because it seems so boring. Same goes for D&D, for Burning Wheel, for Paranoia, for Pathfinder, for Mage. Every other role-playing game ever made, there are some group of people who are like, oh God, not this again. Boredom is relative. So I think the first thing I want to ask here is, obviously you can't go back in time to answer me asking you this question, so it's a bit moot, but like, what game are you playing? Because the game is going to tell you things to challenge your PCs with. And that's where games get fun, right? Space trucking is boring if there is no threat. Icy space roads, salty space mooses, dangerous space truck stops, space biker space gangs, right? Challenges, right? What are the players in your game after mechanically, and then threaten that shit? What do they get rewarded for? Put obstacles between that and them. Has the bank changed their space policy on your space loan for your space truck? Right? Evil bank. Woo! Space truckers. Exciting. You find the things that they want and you don't make it easy to get them. And then you find the things that they get rewarded for and you make those things hard to get. Truckers want to move shit from one place to the other as quickly as possible and get paid as much as possible for it. So you put obstacles in their way. Money obstacles, chaos route obstacles, complications, vehicle problems. Don't get cute about it. Just look at what the players want and then don't give it to them. Make them work for it. This shit literally goes for every single role-playing game ever made in the history of time. So I don't even really care what game you're playing. Interesting gameplay comes from having meaningful decisions in the pursuit of a goal when that goal is being challenged by a meaningful threat. D&D characters want to murder shit for XP, so the game makes shit increasingly difficult to murder. Apocalypse World characters want simple shit like someone nice to smooch and not die of thirst or radiation poisoning, so you kill the people they love and you poison their water supply. Vampire characters want political power, so the game... Well... Okay, so Vampire doesn't do shit to help you there, but if you're a good GM and you're making up for Vampire, you're going to pit them against each other in pursuit of that power. Boring can come from two big sources in a game. Boredom can come from a lack of challenge, and it can come from tedium, right? So a lack of challenge comes along when either the difficulty of the obstacle doesn't match the character or player ability to overcome them, or when the things that challenge the PCs run perpendicular to the ways the PCs can overcome those challenges. For example, in D&D, the game would, by many accounts, become boring if the characters never got to use any of the cool murder hobo powers they have. What good is Magic Missile if you never encounter anything that you want to blast the shit out of? In the same way, D&D would be boring if you only ever fought goblins your whole life. Because goblins are fine at level 1. Goblins are fine to fight at level 2. You can fight a bunch of goblins at level 3. But if you're level 10 and you're still fighting goblins, it's boring. Challenge needs to match up with capability. Give players challenges that they can solve with their ability as players, but also their characters' abilities as characters, and make those challenges correspond to their capability. Some game mechanics avoid this stuff altogether. The dice system in Powered by the Apocalypse, for example, doesn't care about challenge at all. The rolls are always the same difficulty. The game's challenge comes from the game master making interesting moves. And I think that gives those games the kind of spark they always seem to have, because you are always being challenged. Now, you might get a +3 in one of your stats in Apocalypse World, meaning you're more likely to get a 7 and 9 than you are to get a fail. But all that does is just lean the challenges in the other direction. It encourages the GM to put challenges in front of you that might expect you to roll a different stat. So challenge is a big thing. So that might help you move your boring campaign out of Boredom Town. Look at the way you're challenging your PCs and make sure those challenges make sense for the campaign. Tedium can become boring too. And I think, more to the point, tedium might be what you're worried about in this campaign, because having to do the same shit over and over and over can be intensely disinteresting, right? You want to spice things up, but the concept might not lend itself to an infinite number of exciting opportunities. Oh, look, Vern, the space truck has another space flat in the space tires. Better pull over to the space rest stop and drink some cosmic coffee. You know, like, you've only got a limited number of things that feel like space trucking problems. And you can combat that, and this is trite, and I'm sorry, but you can combat that by just being creative. Come up with a variety of stuff to challenge them. Steal from other sources. Get inspired. I don't know, watch Smokey and the Bandit a bunch of times. There are things that you can do to steal inspiration if you can't find it in yourself. But if the concept of your game is super rigid and it's not designed to deviate, you might have to limit how long you play. I mean, if the only solution here is, oh shucks, another space flat, let's fix it and move on, and the game doesn't allow you to say, well, fuck the truck, let's go be space pirates. Yeah. But if you're not allowed to say that, you're stuck with what you got. And I hope the game itself is robust enough to help you. But because you're coming to me for advice, I'm going to assume it's not. Again, look at what the player's needs are in the mechanics. Look at what the character's needs are in the game. What's the reward structure of the game? What are they going to be hungry for? And then put interesting things in the way of those as your inspiration guides you. And when it really comes down to it, I'm talking to you as the game master of this campaign. I'm not talking to your players. I'm talking to you. Are you bored? Is this the campaign you want to be running? Because if you are bored, there is no way in hell you will ever feel inspired to come up with story ideas, come up with narrative points, come up with NPCs, blah, 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 blah. You will not want to do your job. You will want to quit. If you are bored and this is not the campaign that you want to run, that's a warning flag. I'm not going to run a game that I don't want to run. Not for pity, not for charity, not for any other fucking reason. If I don't want to run the game, I will not GM my best. And if I can't GM my best, if there's just no hope of doing my best job, I'm out. I'm not going to do it. Now, I'll play in games, Dark Heresy, that I don't want to run. I will be a PC in games, 13th Age, that I don't really like that much. But I'm not going to game master them. I refuse. If you're excited about the game, you're just not sure what to do to make it more interesting, and the game isn't giving you any advice or guidance or help, then talk to your players. Sit down with them and say, hey, I'm having some trouble getting inspired. Let's have a conversation about this campaign. Why do you like space trucking? What kinds of cool space trucker shit do you want to get up to? If the game doesn't help you flag this, like the Sprawl does or Burning Wheel does or a bunch of other games, if the game is not helping the players tell you what they want in the game, ask them. Ask them as players, take them aside and say, yo, truckers, what's up? What do you like about this? Worst case scenario, you're going to learn something and not feel so alone. And it'll be better than just trying in vain to make the whole thing seem fun by yourself. Talk to your players at the end of this process and just learn why do you like this? I don't understand. That's a thing you can do.
Hi, Adam. I was wondering about your mentality on twisting the knife instead of killing your characters. I know that you are an extremely big fan of this, and I hope that your skills will be able to help me within my games. Thank you.
So, of all of the delightful RPG-related bon mot I've been known for, the best might be a remark that I made about Stars Without Number when I was asked why more player character deaths didn't occur in the game. You know, for a long time in Swansong, people would like to level criticisms about my GMing style, saying, Adam's not harsh enough on the players. Adam needs to kill some characters. Adam needs to get more aggressive about doing damage and blowing up their spaceships. And I believe that in this case, I replied something to the effect of, death is the least interesting thing that I can do to the PCs. I prefer to watch them suffer. Which is funny, given how much straight-up murder killing I've done in, say, Roll20 Presents, Court of Swords, for example. Either of those venues, there have been lots of deaths. This particular criticism sort of missed the point because in Stars Without Number, the players are playing well if they don't get in fights. Getting in fights means you could die. And the players were doing a great job avoiding lethal combat. And certainly I could have said space rocks fall and everyone's space dies, but I really do believe that it's much more interesting to, as you said, twist the knife and give PCs a reason to suffer. And this is why. If you kill a character, their story is over. Barring, like, Journey to Hell or Resurrection Buffy-style angst fests. Generally speaking, killing a character terminates their story. And I tend to get attached to characters, especially in games where character death isn't incentivized as this sort of sword of Damocles threat waiting to drop at the first real mistake. There are games in which that's a thing. You fuck up, you die, you lose your character, you make a new one. The story isn't about your character, it's about you and the constant loss of character. It's vignettes between deaths. This is what Court of Swords looks like. But I like games where that's not the case. And I tend to get annoyed at this utterly myopic view that some tabletop RPG players, GMs, and fans have about death being this ultimate sacrosanct must-include thing in all games. This idea that if life isn't constantly on the line, the threat isn't real. I hate that idea. Certainly, in some games and in some context, death is a real and interesting thing that can happen, but honestly, it's pretty fucking boring and uninspired. You have a narrative developing around a character, right? They're doing things, they're existing in the world, they're struggling with their weaknesses, they're trying to achieve their goals, then they make one fuck up or a bad roll and they're gone. That's it. They're out. Their whole story is over. And I get the idea that permanent, irreparable ramifications for failure are compelling to watch and to be a part of, but I think death, outside of certain contexts, is just sort of stupid. It's lazy. Like, ha ha ha, you died. Right? It feels punitive. It feels Gygaxian. And like, fine, if you're playing an OSR style game, or you're playing a game in which that's been established, then great. But I think that if we're interested in the characters at all, and we want to see them expose themselves to us, we need to see them do things. Death is the antithesis of doing anything. Death is the termination of all doing. Generally, my players want to have opportunities to see their characters be cool badasses who get what they want. Generally, I want to put the screws to them and see what they're like when the shit really hits the fan. Now, some players are really good at doing this to themselves. They'll make characters and then, like cruel children plucking the legs off of insects, just make them suffer all their own. And in two very different ways, by way of example, I think Distracted Elf and Andrew, Commuting Crow, tend towards this sort of play. They have a kind of curiosity about the ways in which they can illustrate their characters to us through their failure and suffering. Some players are less inclined towards this sort of play and need to be encouraged by the cruelty of the world itself. Suffering isn't inherently interesting. Let's get that out of the way. Like, seriously, just do not take this to mean being an asshole and putting your players' characters in shitty situations where they lose everything they have and you just like kill their drones and blow up their apartment to make them cry. That inherently on its own is not interesting. Torturing PCs, making their lives miserable, taking away their toys, and then kicking them in the face while they're down is not inherently cool or interesting. Sometimes it's mean. Sometimes it's spiteful. Sometimes it's inappropriate, and you're going to go too far in an effort to not go too far enough, and you're going to do something that you wish you could take back. But that's a part of learning, right? Accept that you're going to do that. Try to avoid it. It's not about knowing just how to twist the knife, which is what this question is about, and we'll get to it. It's about knowing how deep to put the knife and when and which knife you want to twist. Because, there are so many knives. I think that there's some really good stuff about this in Apocalypse World around being a fan of the character and about mixing your knife twisting in with just like straight up giving PCs the shit that they work for. There's no need to see cruelty as the only tool in the box, but it can be a useful one. And we're talking about that here, cruelty and knife twisting and alternatives to death. So let's get into that. Now, remember, it's cool and fun sometimes to be mean to a character. It's never okay to be mean to your players. Well, unless your players ask you to be mean to them. In which case, we're veering out of GMing advice and into that other advice show. So we'll leave the relationship advice to the side. But you understand the distinction, right? Don't try to hurt your players. Don't make your players feel bad. Fuck up their characters. But don't do anything that you know is going to hurt them personally. All right? Think about that. Now, the more you know about a character, the better you can hurt them. The better you know what they love, the easier it's going to be to break those things and then take it away from them. The more you know about what they want, the easier it's going to be for you to poison it for them so that when they get it, they have to look at you like, but why? Not like this. Never like this. Those moments are beautiful. So what you need to do is get to know the characters. Generally, games in which you can learn these things easily and mechanically are going to allow you better access to the knife-twisting cruelty tools. A game like Burning Wheel, which lays out all the things a character truly cares about and all the things a character is at their core, is the easiest sort of game to really just give it to your players. In fact, in Burning Wheel, it's a core tenet of gameplay to challenge the things they believe and challenge what they are. It's part of the narrative emergent play in Burning Wheel. Games like Pendragon do this too. The character sheet makes pretty bold statements about what the character is like, and the GM can use that to torment you. Oh, you're playing Sir Periwinkle the Chaste, huh? Well, let's see what you do when you encounter Sir Sexy of Castle Boner. How erotic. But do it better than that. The idea here is that the character sheet is a set of flags to the GM, ways to know what the players care about vis-a-vis their character in the character sheet. Once you know what the characters want and need, you can set about making it a challenge and making it impossible to keep once they have it. The idea here is to find places where the characters are vulnerable and then mess those up, right? This is a thing we see constantly in superhero comics, like Aunt May and Gwen Stacy and the poor innocent Kents and what have you, right? Constantly, smarter supervillains go after that shit. Spider-Man fundamentally doesn't really care about his own safety. You can do what you want to Spider-Man, and he's just going to be like, thwip, and fly away, right? He'll be okay. You can beat him up, no big deal. What he really cares about is the weaker, smushy idiots that surround him. Don't go after Spider-Man. Don't go after Superman. Go after Aunt May. Go after Lois Lane. Or try to find some less sexist example. Good luck. Finding out what your characters care about and hitting those things instead of going at the PCs directly is a great start. Now, you're going to want to do this subtly. Don't be a blundering idiot about it, right? Don't just be like, you got home and Aunt May's, she goblin, she's dead in the fridge. Spider-Man, I got you. Having the paladin drop his precious +3 sword off a cliff is one thing. But having him shed his vows, abandon his god, and snap the bloody sword he used to kill his only son over his knee in grief and sorrow, ooh, that's the good shit right there. Be subtle. Play it slow. Look at the status quo and find gentle ways to erode it. Ask questions. Ask so many questions. Ask questions and be sneaky. Give the players rope and tie that noose so slowly they don't realize you're about to kick the box out from under them. Right? I think learning how to let the players put themselves into bad situations is the best thing to do. They're going to come to fear that grin that you make when you realize they've just handed the loaded gun to you and pointed it at their face. Look for the game that supports your methodology here. This approach isn't perfect for every game. You know, the Fall from Grace story is one of my favorites. The watching the PCs self-destruct story is something that I love. But it's not going to fit in to every game. You wouldn't do that in a situation like basic Dungeons and Dragons or like, I don't know, Ryutama. Ryutama is not a game about having your soul rent in terrible torture. It's about going on an adventure with your friends. So this technique, this twist the knife business, it only really works in games where it's part of the game inherently. A good game plays the game as it's intended to be played and doesn't shoehorn the kind of thing they want into it just because they want it. This twist the knife shit, I wouldn't put it in Nebula Jazz. Now, I'll give the characters in Nebula Jazz lots of opportunities to make goofy slapstick mistakes that are their own fault, but I'm not going to try and wring horrible angst out of them. Same with Court of Swords. It just doesn't fit for that. I'll do it in the Sprawl, though, right? There's room for this in Cyberpunk. I think the thing is that all of this has to be consensual. I would be super pissed if my GM got all mean and weird during a friendly game that we posited as light and fun. Same token, I would be so disappointed if my Burning Wheel GM didn't really torture me once in a while. It's all about expectations. And I think this is a tricky one, and it takes a lot of practice. At first, you're likely to be less subtle than you think you are. You got to be an ogre before you can be an assassin. You're going to be less skilled than you'd like to be, and just generally less good at any of this than you will be with some practice. So keep at it. If you play the right game, you learn the player's characters, and you find interesting ways, and not just for you. Keep in mind that twisting the knife is not a GM masturbatory experience. This is a group endeavor. So you twisting the knife should be about giving the characters an opportunity to suffer so that the players can explore their character and show off how cool they are to everyone else. We don't want to feel like our character is an embarrassing piece of shit. We want our character to feel like they're an evil piece of shit or that they've made horrible decisions, but because it's interesting to the narrative. So twisting the knife is not just about you getting your jollies by being a dick to your characters. It's not all about that. It's at least some percentage about that. And if that's a thing that gets you and your players off, then rock and roll. But give them an opportunity to enjoy it too, right? Find interesting ways to make the character's life hell by learning about what their characters want and what they're like and where they're weak. Remember, the submissive is always the one with the power, and you're not doing this to be shitty. You're doing it to give them an opportunity to show off and to have nuance and detail. You're putting them in the spotlight, and just like Vincent said, being a fan of the player's characters. It's one of the best things you can do as a game master. And in this way, your cruelty exists to serve them, not the other way around. This has been episode 43 of Office Hours. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. These were some odd meta questions. We didn't really cover like game mechanics like we often do, or how to make things work in specific games. So it's cool. I like getting on another level with this stuff, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. We will be back next time with episode 44, and it's going to work the same way as it always does. Go to my website, www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. You can fill out that form, submit your questions, and I will answer them here on the show. This is it for today's episode. We will see you next time.